Shalom. Welcome to our home. I'm Rabbi Scott from Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers. Welcome. This is our midweek recording of a Torah study and brought to you during this coronavirus time from our home, as you can see behind me. We are not sure how we're going to proceed on these midweek teachings. We may record them from the synagogue when we reopen, or we may continue to record them here from home. Not sure how we're going to proceed with that. I think there was some interest in having a Torah study at the synagogue where we could have some interaction and discussion, and I think that would be really nice. So we're looking for that option in the future. But for now, we're continuing to record these from home, which is why you see me here. Just a note, today is, of course, May 27th, and Wednesday, and we have announced that Beth Yeshua will be resuming live services this week. The synagogue will be open, and we will be having a service there. There's some restrictions, guidelines, regulations, whatever rules, however you want to call it, for how we're going to do this. Social distancing, of course, is one of the dynamics which must be observed and must be considered. And we're also considering some other guidelines as well. So effectively, I'm going to ask you to go to www.bethyeshuafla.com. And there's a letter from me there with a full discussion of how this is all going to work. So I'll recommend that to you. This, of course, applies to those of you who are close enough to meet with us on this day. And, of course, this applies to this time. We may have to make some changes down the road, but for now, this is what we're doing. If you're listening to this message 6 months in the future, then this is all probably mostly irrelevant, or at least perhaps some interesting history. That being said, moving on. This week's Torah study. This week is Shavuot, depending on your tradition or when you mark the time for most of us. The Shavuot holiday begins Thursday night, and there's 2 days in the diaspora for Shavuot. Ending Shabbat on sundown, the Saturday, May 30th. So this week's Torah portion would be Naso from Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 4. But this week, because it's Shavuot, we have other readings as well. It's kind of complicated. There's a first service, second service, and then there's the first service on Shabbat. And effectively what you have is on the first day of Shavuot, you have Shemot, Exodus chapter 19 through 20, which is the appearance of Adonai at Sinai, and the 10 sayings or the 10 commandments. And then also from Bamidbar, Numbers 28, it has just the discussion of Shavuot, which is the first day of first fruits when you bring to Adonai a new grain offering during the conclusion of the Feast of Weeks. This, of course, is out of Numbers 28. Numbers 28, Bamidbar, chapter 28, is the retelling, the echo of the Leviticus Moedim, appointed times calendar that we see in Leviticus 23, which we all follow for keeping track of our holidays throughout the year. The second day of Shavuot, the special readings we have, and this year, of course, the second day of Shavuot is Shabbat. The second day, it comes from Devarim, chapter 14, through chapter 16, tithing, remembering the Levite, the Shemitah, the cancellation of debts, and so forth. Again, Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 through 16, verse 17. It's really not so much about the cancellation of debts, the Shemitah, but is more about a safety net system whereby the poor are protected and buffered from getting poorer. And the Yeshua said that the poor you will always have with you, in order to instruct us, in a sense, that the poor are always there to remind us of our poverty in standing with Adonai, that we who are impoverished of soul that we who are indebted to the law of sin, to the penalty and consequence of our transgressions, likewise, since Adonai has been generous with us and has forgiven our debts and has provided atonement for those of us that are provided atonement for us, that we are to be likewise generous to the impoverished and to the indebted among us. So that's the summary for the special readings this week. The Naso portion, which again was Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 4:21 through chapter 7, verse 89. Naso, just in summary, quickly, completing the head count of the children of Israel taken in the Sinai desert, a total of 8,000 or so Levite men between the ages of 30 and 50, counted. Those who will be doing the actual work of transporting the tabernacle and servicing the tabernacle. Adonai communicates to Moshe the law of the Sota, the wayward wife, who is suspected of unfaithfulness to her husband. Also given is the law of the Nazir, who forswears wine, who refuses to drink, lets his or her hair grow out, and is forbidden to become contaminated through contact with a dead body. And then it goes on with the instructions of how to bless the people of Israel, to place the name of Adonai upon them. The leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel are to bring their offerings. They have special offerings at the inauguration of the altar. The altar is given an inauguration, and their gifts are brought on different days and individually described by the Torah. That's the summary of just the current Naso, the current portion. There's always so much and so many different ways that we can go when we discuss the Torah. I think what I want to do today is spend a little time on this curious law of the Nazir, that we would say the Nazarite in common English parlance. The three main examples of a Nazir in scriptures are the characters of Samson, Samuel, and Yochanan, who's called John. He's called the Baptist or the Baptizer in the Greek. He would be called the Immerser in the Hebrew. Baptizo being the Greek word for immersion. So that's how you get John the Baptist or John the Baptizer. He didn't go to the Baptist church. He was just called Yochanan the Immerser. But of course, in our current language, we end up with these sort of curious labels for people. Under the ancient Hebrew law, a man or woman engaged by a vow to abstain from wine and all intoxicating liquors, and from the fruit of the vine in any form, to let the hair grow. These are the laws of the Nazir. Not to enter any house with a dead body in it, not to come to a funeral. If by accident the Nazir is in the presence of somebody who passes, somebody who dies, then they go back and they restart their Nazir vow. This vow generally was expected to last 8 days, sometimes only a month, sometimes during the whole lives, when the parents would initiate and establish the child as a Nazir even before he was born. At the conclusion, for those who took a vow of separation, a vow of the Nazir, the conclusion of it, they would bring sacrifices to the priest, and the priest would cut off the person's hair and burn it, after which he was free from his vow. The text says over and over again times of separation, consecration. It's very clearly that this is supposed to be a person who's given themselves to living differently and significantly differently on earth. This summary is in Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 6. One of the things that I want to mention is that the sacrifices that were brought at the conclusion of the vow were some considerable expense. They were considered to be somewhat expensive. A perpetual Nazarite, not one who took the vow of the Nazir voluntarily, but the one who was consecrated as such by their parents, would have been consecrated from birth. This is by the mother of Samuel, from 1 Samuel chapter 1, and they would continue all their lives in this state of the Nazir, neither drinking wine nor cutting their hair. Such were Samson and Yochanan. We see this illustrated in Judges chapter 13 for Samson, and in Luke chapter 1 and chapter 7 for the life of Yochanan. These, at the completion of the consecration, these sacrifices for the poor were often relieved by persons who were not Nazarites. It would be considered an act of social piety, of social charity. It was considered a good thing to be the one to pay the fees, to pay the sacrifices in order to complete the vow of the Nazir as prescribed. Rav Shaul did this. Paul did this, as he did this ostensibly in the first place to disarm the jealousy and the envy of those who were presenting him as hostile to the faith of the Torah. He took four of the Jews, believers, Messianic Jews, whose vow, Nazir vow, was completed, and he assumed the expense of their offerings, and with them went through the customary purification, and would have been the burning of the hair and so forth, cutting the hair and the burning of the hair. We see this narrated in Acts chapter 21. Verse 20, see, brother, how many myriads there are among the Jewish people who have believed, and they are all zealous for the Torah. This is in the context of people accusing Rav Shaul, Paul, of speaking against the Torah or against the traditions. And in order for Rav Shaul to demonstrate that the law of Adonai, the Torah, wasn't invalidated by belief in Yeshua, that he went and completed this Nazarite vow with these four men. He paid their expenses as an act of this charity. It says that all these Gentiles have been told that you will teach all the Jewish people among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to the customs. What's to be done then? No doubt they will hear you have come. Verse 23, so do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have a vow on themselves. Take them and purify yourself along with them. Pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. That way all will realize there is nothing to the things they have been told about you, but that you yourself walk in an orderly manner, keeping the Torah. As for the Gentiles who have believed, however, we have written by letter what we decided for them to abstain from what is offered to idols, from blood, and from what is strangled, and from immorality. And so we see this, verse 26, the next day Paul took the men, purifying himself along with them. He went into the temple, announcing when the days of purification would be completed, and the sacrifice would be offered for each one of them. And so Paul accomplished this along with them and entered into this Nazarite vow as a demonstration of this. We have this line here, verse 25, as for the Gentiles, we've written them by letter what we decided for them to abstain from what is offered to idols, from blood, from what is strangled, from immorality. These 4 sort of points were offered as a starting place for the Gentiles to be in community with the Jews. This is an echo going back to Acts chapter 15. From verse 22, it seemed good to the emissaries and the elders and with the whole community, and they're getting ready to send out people to the Gentiles, to be emissaries to the Gentiles. They send out Paul and Barnabas, and they also send out Barsabbas and Silas, Judah and Silas. These are leading men among the Messianic Jewish brethren. And they sent a letter with them addressing some of these issues. What had happened is that some of the Gentiles had become believers, and we need to figure out what to do with them and how to integrate them into the community. And it says this, to the emissaries and elders, your brothers, to the Gentile brothers of Antioch, Syria, and Cilicia. These are the communities where we had great growth among the Gentiles. Greetings. And he says this, again, we're in Acts chapter 15. Since we have heard that some from among us have troubled you with words disturbing to your souls, although we gave them no such authorization. What this is referring to was this controversy that the Gentiles needed to become circumcised in order to enter into salvation with Yeshua. It seemed good to us, having come to one accord, to select, and again we've got that line, it seemed good to us, it seemed prudent, it seemed like the right decision to make. It seemed good to us, having come to one accord, to select men to send to you with our beloved Barnabas and Paul, men who have risked their lives for the name of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. We therefore have sent to you Judah and Silas, who themselves will report to you the same things by word of mouth. Verse 28, it seemed good to the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit, to not place on you any greater burden than these essentials. Verse 29, these are the essentials, that you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. By keeping away from these things, you will do well. Shalom, peace. This was necessary because at the time the Gentiles were becoming more prominent in the community, and there was they were in fellowship with the Messianic Jews, and by virtue of their fellowship were also in fellowship with the Jews. Further context for this statement is this revolutionary concept from verse 16 of the same chapter, Acts chapter 15. After this, I will return and rebuild the fallen tabernacle of David, or the fallen sukkah of David, rebuild its ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of humanity may seek the Lord, namely all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says Adonai, who makes these things known from of old. This is from Acts chapter 16. It is a quote from Amos. But continuing on in Acts chapter 15, verse 19, therefore I judge not to trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but to write to them to abstain from the contamination of idols, from sexual immorality, from what is strangled, and from blood. Verse 21, for Moses from ancient generations has had in every city those who proclaim him, since he is read in all the synagogues every Shabbat. The point that I see here is this, that they're giving the Gentiles instructions, and it says this, for Moses from ancient generations has had in every city who proclaim him, since he has read. These are the Gentiles. He is read in all the synagogues every Shabbat. This is where the Gentiles are going to get the law that was given through Moses. The understanding was that these Gentiles who were coming into fellowship, and they were going to be in the synagogues, and they were going to be in fellowship both with the Jews and the Messianic Jews. And rather than create controversy, it was recommended that they follow these 4 precepts in order to not cause greater distress. But it's a starting point. It's a starting point for fellowship, but it's also a starting point for the law of Adonai. We've spent a great deal of time talking about the starting points of the law for the people of Jacob, the exiles coming out of Egypt. Their starting point was the manna. They received the manna, and they had their basic laws of manna, the 3 or 4 basic laws, depending on how you want to describe it, of how to handle the manna. Likewise, the Gentiles are given 3 or 4 basic laws as a starting point to be in fellowship, but also to begin a journey of understanding the law of Adonai. This is the Acts interpretation of Amos. Let's read from the original in Amos chapter 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up David's fallen sukkah. I will restore its breaches, raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in days of old. This is a reference to Adonai recovering and restoring Israel. And it says this in verse 12, so they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations called by my name. What are all the nations called by the name of Adonai? It is all those nations within the kingdom of Adonai who are called by his name. This is a declaration. It is a declaration of Adonai, the one who will do this. Verse 13, behold, days are soon coming. It is a declaration of Adonai. Skipping on down, verse 14, yes, I will restore the captivity of my people Israel. I will rebuild desolate cities and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them in their land. They will never again be plucked up. Adonai, your God, has said it. Notice here in the description the treading of grapes, the planting of vineyards, the drinking of wine. Let's just talk about this briefly. What does it mean to drink wine? I used to drink on occasion. It's very, very seldom that I drink any kind of alcoholic beverage, mostly because of my schedule, mostly because I live a pretty busy life, and I can't afford the side effects of even a glass of wine very often. It's very unusual. I enjoy wine, beer, other alcoholics in drinks on occasion. I enjoy that, but it's just not something that is afforded to me at this kind of in my schedule right now. What is it about alcohol? We understand it chemically. It has an undeniable chemical effect on us. But let me propose to you that ideally, of course, alcohol is misused and abused, much like all of our pleasures and indulgences, food and other things. But what is it about alcohol, wine? I propose to you that wine is only enjoyed in a healthy sense. It's only enjoyed in peace and safety. It's what you enjoy when you're comfortable. It's what you enjoy when you're feeling good about your surroundings. Why? Because you're vulnerable. In one sense, it's mind altering. It's a mind altering chemical, but in another sense, it removes our inhibitions. We are said to lose our judgment if we drink too much. This is the underlying effect. It's undeniable. Yet, in spite of this, Yeshua was not reluctant to turn water into wine at the wedding. He was only reluctant at the timing, but he was willing to do this, and he did it. The point is, for me anyway, wine is a symbol of great enjoyment, but it's also a symbol of peace and safety, of vulnerability, of celebration, of completion. It's as if, you know what, my day is done, I've accomplished my task, nothing further will be required of me. I can relax, I can enter into the fullness of joy with a glass of wine, because nothing else is going to be demanded of me. And in this place, I'm allowed to enjoy a glass of wine. What a pleasure, what a delight to think, it's done, I'm going to enjoy this wine. What is the vow of the Nazir? The vow of the Nazir is the vow of servitude. They are busy about the work of consecration. They are busy about the work of the kingdom, the work of Adonai. This is why Rav Shaul was so willing to join the four men in their vow and to also become purified, even though he didn't have time to complete the vow in one sense. There's a sense in which he was busy about the work of the kingdom, absolutely. I may have mentioned my schedule. My schedule hardly compares to the work that Rav Shaul was doing. There's a sense in the Nazir that their entire life is about the business of the kingdom. There's also a reference in Acts chapter 18 to cutting the hair, likely again this Nazirite vow completion. It may have been completion of another vow, of another Nazirite vow, a Nazir vow. The vow of the Nazir is voluntary. It's something you would choose to do. Contrast that with the high priest, who is by genealogy and by appointment male. He is appointed and he is chosen and he is restricted from a certain family, from a certain people. In contrast with that is the Nazir. The Nazir is something a person largely takes on for themselves. The Nazir is by self-appointment. The Nazir is like a presumptuous bride. They're choosing to step up and say, okay, I'm here. They're choosing to separate themselves for Adonai. We read extensively about the consecration of the priests. The priests were all consecrated. They were consecrated by virtue of the fact that they were Aaron's descendants and other tribes that were chosen, other people that were chosen, other families that were chosen. But the Nazir is the presumptuous servant. He presumes himself and names himself as a consecrated Nazir. Another thing about it is he does not cut his hair. The hair is the symbol of identity, of gender. It's almost as if there is a blurring of gender here, not in the way of our modern sexual identity, gender politics of our day, and certainly not in the manner of say, the sexual deviance that is expressed through gender blurring that we see in our culture in modern times. This is rather a blurring of the lines because the person who is identifying themselves as a Nazir is, in a sense, consecrating themselves in their identity to a place beyond that of their gender. It's almost like this. Samson had long hair. Usually long hair is the glory of a woman. It blurred his own identity. His identity is that of someone set apart unto Adonai, not unto himself or unto herself. It's a sense of my identity as a male, as a man, is part of the fundamental essence of who I am. It's one of those fundamental truths of my consciousness. And then for me to let my hair grow long is to almost say, well, I am fundamentally a man, but going deeper than that, I am, at least for this period of time, going deeper. I am a Nazir, which is more fundamental. And there becomes this blurring, this overlapping of the man and the Nazir. There's no question that anybody talking to me in the street would say that's a man, but my long hair, he would say, well, yes, but he's a Nazir. Another aspect of this the Nazir, the vow of the Nazir, it says that he's not to go near a dead body. He's not to have any contact with death. He's not even to be around somebody who accidentally dies. If he does, inadvertently is exposed to somebody who dies, he restarts his vow back at the beginning. He restarts the time period for the vow of the Nazir. And so the Nazir does not have any contact with death. It's a sort of pre-resurrected existence. There's no death in resurrection. It's as if there's no death in his life. Living as if death is not a facet or an aspect of society. For the Nazir, death is not an aspect of their lives. It's as if they live in a suspended, separate reality, a blurring of the lines again. We have this line from Corinthians, death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? In a sense, the Nazir is living for a time as if there is no death. Again, the vow of the Nazir is a temporary vow. It is made either in a lifelong commitment made by the parent subjected upon the child, or it is a limited time. And this speaks to me of the limited time that we are bound by our time here. We still live among the living in this world. We still live among the living who are dying here. But by the vow of the Nazir, we are suspended between the joys of this world, preferring to set aside the joys of this world and wait for the joys of the next. We are suspended, in a sense, between our identity in this world and being known by our identity in the next realm. Don't you know that they will be neither male nor female, Yeshua says. What is the adornment of the head that reveals gender? It is my hair. Don't you know that there will be neither male nor female? And so on. So we end up with these blurring of the lines. The Nazir is living in a sort of a shell, a separate reality, if you will. The high priest, likewise, as we've talked extensively, the high priest likewise has access to a separate reality when he goes into the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies being a carved out space in the temple where the presence, the Shekinah, the glory of Adonai would appear and would dwell, and the high priest would go in there, and the high priest would make clouds from incense, and the clouds of the high priest would mix with the clouds of the Shekinah, the glory of Adonai, and there would be this blurring of the lines. But this entirely takes place within the containment of the Mishkan, and the tabernacle, and then later the temple. The Nazir replicates this, and replicates this in a way that is transportable. As a Nazir, you go here and there, you live and breathe, you're among your family. The other aspect that's very important, I think, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, was a man, restricted to a man. And there's a purpose for that, and that's according to Adonai's prescriptions. But it's notable that the vow of the Nazir can be taken by a man or a woman. There's no gender restriction upon that, and allows an accessibility to that role, to that place of the Kohen Gadol, this sort of imitation of the Kohen Gadol, if you will. All right, moving on. The Yeshua was called a Nazarene in the English translations, Nazrati in the Messianic translations. He was called a Nazrati because he lived in Nazareth. And why is this significant? Matthew is using a kind of intertextuality here. We talk greatly of intertextuality in the Torah, but here we have an example of Matthew kind of functioning a little bit like a rabbinic sage in his interpretation of the text. Here's what's happening. If you're reading along and you come to Matthew and it says that he was called a Nazarene because he lived in Nazareth. And then it says this was spoken to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. Matthew says this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. So then you go looking through the prophets to find out what Matthew was talking about. And you realize very quickly you're not going to find anywhere in the prophets where Mashiach, the person of the Mashiach, was going to live in Nazareth. Nor can you find anything that he was going to be a Nazir from his birth. So what is it that Matthew is talking about? Well, once again, you stumbled upon it. There's actually the town of Nazareth is based on the Hebrew word, which is Nazir, and the Numbers passage is also called the Nazir, but they're spelled differently, different letters, spelling them. And this is what you end up with, is the passage in Isaiah referring to the Nazir, which is the word for branch. From Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, then a rod or a shoot, hoter is the Hebrew word, a twig or a branch, a small branch, a shoot, a new bud, will come forth out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch, Netzer, will bear fruit out of his roots. And it goes on to say, the Ruach of Adonai will rest upon him, the spirit of wisdom and insight, and we know this immediately to be Yeshua, the spirit of wisdom and insight, the spirit of counsel and might, the spirit of knowledge and the fear of Adonai. His delight will be in the fear of Adonai. He will not judge by what his eyes see, nor decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with fairness for the poor of the land. He will strike the land with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. and righteousness will be the belt around his loins, and faithfulness the belt around his waist. This is the Mashiach. Everybody would agree that this is the Mashiach. There's no question about that. But Matthew is using a play on words of the two Netzirs, the Netzir in Numbers, which is the vow of the Netzir, the consecrated one, and Netzir, which is the branch. Again, we have this, though the Mashiach is the one who is between two realms, between heaven and between earth. Mashiach is the Netzer, and I can be a Natzir. Mashiach is a branch, and I can be a Natzir like Mashiach with this vow that I take. And we see that all of this comes together and begins to just find its trajectory and find its terminus point. We see that Mashiach is living in this sort of suspended reality, the Son of God coming to earth as a man, the Emmanuel, who is Adonai with us, El with us, God with us. This is our Yeshua, our HaMashiach, but this is, again, this kind of overlap where he is sort of between these two realms, between heaven and earth. Similarly, Yeshua is the high priest, and I can be like him as a priest. I can function like him as a form of high priest in my prayers. Likewise, Yeshua's gender is the gender of the Son of God, and not a male or female gender as such as we understand it here on earth, but rather he's the Son of God. My gender will also likewise be changed to be like him. And in this way, the Natzir, the vow of the Natzir, gives me a glimpse into what it means to imitate and follow Yeshua and be like him in all these ways, that I can be like the high priest, I can be like the one who is the Son of God, that I will be changed to be like him, that my fundamental identity, the lines in the definition of my fundamental identity will begin to change, and I will see myself as being like him rather than like my father and my grandfather and my brother and my son. Rather than being a man among men, I will be more like the Son of God as I am transformed by the work of his Spirit. And lastly, he is the rock, and I am his stone, in the same way that he spoke to Kephon. And he said, "You are a little stone, and upon this boulder, this massif, this bedrock, I will construct my Messianic community." He is the builder of the house of Israel. He is the builder of the house of Adonai. And we are his stone. He is the chief cornerstone, but we are a stone like him, as he is the chief cornerstone. And so, again, the Natzir has all these echoes of these themes of the imitation of Yeshua and of conformity with him. But that conformity comes at a cost of blurring our identity in this realm, in this. And that is a side effect and a byproduct of that. But it is interesting that the law of the Natzir, the vow of the Natzir, is for the most part, except for a few notable examples, like we spoke of, those who were consecrated and set aside to be a Natzir from before their birth, that other than those, the vow of the Natzir is a temporary vow. It's a vow you take in a season of consecration, but it's temporary. And we do return to this real world because we do exist in this world, and we are part of this world, and we are here to continue to be a blessing to those all around us. The conclusion of the parsha, of the portion, speaks of the priestly blessing, and it says that in this way you are to place my name upon the people. As a Nazir, we have again this idea of bringing a consecrated life to the people around us, but it is a temporary duty and a temporary consecration, and then we go back to our normal existence, and we take the name of Adonai and we place it on the people around us by being with them, in step with them. Again, our poverty before Adonai and his compassion is what gives us compassion to address the poverty, the impoverished around us, impoverished of spirit and of money and resources. So all of this is a way, again, of pressing into Adonai, but also re-engaging, because we are in step with culture. During this time of COVID disease, many of us believers have lived as if we're afraid. That's just a reality. We are voluntarily self-quarantining, working from home, pulled our kids out of school, so on and so forth. Our synagogue has closed its doors, and we are resuming services this weekend, but we've been closed for 10 whole weeks, 70 days, which is a significant number, that we were closed for 70 days. But we are resuming services this Shabbat. We have lived under the threat of COVID, even though we live without any fear. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, of self-discipline, of power, and of a sound mind. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but we are living as if we are in the same constraints of fear, because that's what we are doing in order to be a blessing to our neighbors, in order to try to get ahead of this disease, to acknowledge the effects of this disease, albeit my life belongs to Adonai completely. If I die tomorrow from COVID, so be it. But in the meantime, I am not afraid of this, but I live with compassionate understanding with my neighbors. When I go outside, I'm not afraid of the disease that I might catch from my neighbors, but I recognize that they're living in fear, and so I stand several feet away from them, and I don't approach them. And we just understand this, and so we live with grace with all the people around us. It's as if our personal time with Adonai is like a form of the vow of the Nazir, where we come and we enter into a different reality, if you will, a different type of identity and existence, where our identity from this world to the next becomes blurred. And then we resume our interactions with our family, we resume our interactions with our neighbors, because we're also in this world. So once again, I enjoy being with you during these times, during these Torah discussions. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or any discussion, and would look forward to any type of conversation on these items. Again, if you are local to us in Fort Myers and you would like to join us for services, if you're part of our community and you'd like to be there, we will continue our online broadcast. And so if you are elderly, or if you feel vulnerable in any way, shape, or form, certainly if you are under any immunocompromised diseases or syndromes or conditions, if you've had recent surgeries, if you've had a transplant, we do have a few of these in our community, and so it's just very important that we provide for you if you would like to stay home, you can still watch our services online. Our services will be continued to be broadcast online. And of course, if you have any symptoms of COVID, we would ask you to stay home and join us online. But for the rest of us, it will be Shavuot. It's just a very important day on the calendar for the Jew and for the Gentile. The beginnings of this Messianic pouring out of the Ruach on all nations, and the language being expressed in all nations, going from the Tower of Babel, where we spoke the gibberish to each other and the people were dispersed. We are now returning and bringing our languages with us, but we all hear the same word, the word of Adonai, speaking to all of us in salvation in Yeshua, which is directed to all of us. So this is what Shavuot is to us believers in Yeshua, and is what it is for us as Jewish believers and as Gentile believers. So just a very powerful day on the calendar. It is no small thing that this COVID quarantine came along from Pesach to Shavuot, and I'm just very keen on Shavuot being a pivot point for what's coming next. I don't know what's coming next. I don't claim to have any insight thereof. It's interesting that the Jewish perspective on prophecy is that it's there to tell us what just happened. When it happens, you look to the words of the prophecies and you say, oh, that's just happened. In the same way Matthew, speaking earlier, was saying, this came about in order to fulfill what was spoken of in the prophets, or what was written in the prophets. It's like, see, there it is. See what just happened. Again, don't know what's coming, but I know that we are in seasons of preparations, and so just eagerly looking forward to the next season as we resume fellowship together this Shavuot on Shabbat. The Lord bless you this week and be with you. Adonai comforts you and be close to you. And please let me know if you have any questions or need anything. Just love you with the love of Yeshua, and look forward to speaking with you and seeing you all very soon. Shalom, shalom.